Sumerian thing and the UFO thing, like you're saying. In both fields of study, I mean, I was thinking, what's it take to interest you, buddy? I mean, do you have to come up and slug you with a tuna in the face? I mean, what does it take? I mean, if this don't get you, what's going to get you?
Right.
And, how did you get interested in UFOs? I was first to ask, I guess. I'll have to start with that.
Well, it was just as a kid. I was, I don't know. I was just fascinated with science fiction and like real space travel. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and then the UFO section in my little local library was right next to the science fiction section, and I just kind of thought the two were part of the same thing, and in my head they were. And at the same time, my father was a veteran of World War II, and he had a lot of military history books around the house, so I used to read those too. So at some point, these two interests came together, and I started reading a lot of military history, and I would read every UFO book that I could get my hands on.
Did you ever, when we talked on the phone, you got Martin Caden's book, that Ghosts of the Air, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
See, that intrigued me. Your book intrigued me. And your book, by the way, is UFOs in Wartime, I should say for everybody. It's a very good book. I'm staring at it right now. And we're talking, I guess what intrigues me too, Mac, is that military observers, I give a higher level of credibility. I mean, this is they're professionals. This is serious business. It isn't two teenagers that are out, necking in the woods and see something. I mean, not that doesn't mean they can't see something legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
No, but I mean, I just look at UFO sightings by pilots and military types as just having an extra level of credibility. And,
right. Because, in their training and also in their experience, they come to know as second nature, what they would normally see while flying around up there, what is, natural phenomena, and, what isn't. And so, if they see a bright light off in the distance and it's sunset or sunrise, they know that's an airplane. They know, when they're landing, they see some kind of a white glare off to their side, they know it's most likely a flock of seagulls. Seagulls are reported as UFOs a lot, believe it or not, because of their color. And but if they see a cigar-shaped object, tailing them or flying parallel to them and coming at them and veering off at the last moment, they know that this isn't something natural. They know that this is something unnatural, and therefore, right, as you say, I think our military pilots are the best observers of UFOs that we have. And just getting back to the book for a second, that's what the book is about, is 70 encounters between the military and UFOs.
I know, and we're just about coming up to the break, but I'm really anxious to talk about the book because it highlights a whole chronology of this, all the way back to ancient times to the current day, and that really does intrigue me. I guess before we take a break, you might mention to the folks what your website is, and where they can get the book and this and that.
Well, the book is published by Penguin Books, so it's at every bookstore across the U.S. and Canada. And my publisher always wants me to remind people to please patronize your local bookstore. However, if you can't get out to your local bookstore, the best place to buy it is on Amazon.com. My website is mackmaloney.com. There's a lot of information there about how we put the book together and other books that I've done. But, the straightest line is to go to Amazon.com and order it there.
Very good, very good. Well, fellas, we'll take about a 4 or 5 minute break, and we'll come back and talk about these UFOs in wartime. We'll be right back. Well, it's good to be back with you and with our guest, Mack Maloney, tonight. I want to once again remind you that we have that very good call-in feature. That's at 786-837-2262. That wouldn't tie you to the computer, for example. And, there's an iPhone app that Joe said was just introduced this past Wednesday, and that gives a very clear listening experience. So we're trying to be technologically on the cutting edge here, and I like it myself to be able to just call in and listen without having to be tied to a computer. So anyhow, we've got that going on. And Mac, I guess you're back with us?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. Now, Mack, so you really, I did notice you have quite a few books on military history itself, even separate and distinct from the UFO phenomenon. Look like you have quite a few in Barnes and Noble.
Right. It's I think I've written over somewhere between 30 and 40 books. They say that after 20 you're supposed to stop counting, but the majority of them have been military novels, military adventure books, and then I did do a series of 5 science fiction books. But this book, UFOs in Wartime, is my first nonfiction book in more than 20 years. So it was a different experience for me. But, that's where my interests have always been, and I guess I picked it up from my father, because he was so much into military history, and as I said, his books were around the house all the time. When I was a kid, I used to just pick them up and first look at the pictures and then wound up reading them. So it's always been something that interests me.
I guess I had a kind of a similar upbringing and similar exposure. My father wasn't particularly a military buff, but my brothers were all in the military. But what I'm saying is that, he was a big science fiction buff, and he got me interested in that. Mm-hmm. And then, I've probably said this before in different shows, but of course, my little experience, and part of the time we lived around Florida, the Bermuda Triangle, and all these other shenanigans. Mm-hmm. It was hard not to be interested in UFOs, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's one thing, really, throughout my whole life. I've like we were discussing before the break. I mean, of course, it's only been in recent years that you weren't subject to a lot of ridicule when you mentioned UFOs. Everybody think you're some kind of nutcase or mm-hmm. Something like that. And I would say I've noticed in the last, say, 15 years a very, very big sea change where people they're not laughing at it anymore. I don't know whether it was the Phoenix Lights experience in '97 that everybody knew happened, and then, other different events like the O'Hare Airport sighting, mm-hmm. say, in late, 2007 or 8 or whenever it was. Right. And, it's just as obvious as a sore thumb that there's something going on here, right. Whether we know what's going on or not.
But I agree with you there. But the problem that I think remains is that, as we're going back to what we were saying earlier, is that our military pilots and our military personnel are the best observers of UFOs, and they still cannot come forward and tell us what they've seen. And, a lot of airline pilots are in the same situation because most of those guys are ex-military pilots who, are hired by the airlines. I mean, the airlines count on military pilots to become commercial airline pilots. So both military pilots and airline pilots are still under this, it's an unwritten rule, but they cannot, and I talk to them all the time. And they've told me, I've heard stories from military pilots and airline pilots that would make your eyeballs spin, but really? They always say this is off the record. Right. And my pet project, I might have mentioned this when we were talking off air there the other day. What I think should happen is, and I realize this is a big mountain to climb, but what I think should happen is I think that we should to somehow make the military, the U.S. military, give a blanket amnesty to every person who was in the military, in the service, and saw a UFO while they were in the service, and then was told by superior officers not to talk about it. Lots of UFO researchers and other people involved in UFO, research, or people on the radio or whatever, authors, they tell me that when they go to these different conventions and giving a speech, whatever, what invariably happens is afterwards, veterans will come up to them and say, I wish I could tell you what I saw, but I can't because I've been told not to. Well, if the military, if we were able to shame the military through some kind of a media program to give blanket amnesty to everybody who has ever seen a UFO while in their service time, think of the avalanche of UFO sightings that we would then have to study, and maybe get us closer to the solving this puzzle. And then if the military if they refuse to do it, then we know it would prove that they're holding something back. So I think it's a win-win situation. I know it'd be a long climb, but I think that's something that if a lot of people got behind that, I think that would be ultimately successful.
Well, now that's an interesting tack on it. It really is. Now, one thing I will, we had a UFO, well, not a UFO guest so much as a guest that had some insight into UFOs and written a very good book on it, Colonel John Alexander, back February 28th. But one thing he said in his little presentation at the Ozark UFO conference, which is kind of true, is that we really have had disclosure. I mean, granted, not complete free access of information like you're talking about, but there's been enough by even like Gorbachev, the old Russian leader, and a guy named De Brouwer, whatever his name was. He's Deputy Defense Minister of Belgium, and many generals, our generals, and it's just clear as crystal that we have had official disclosure in a roundabout way. But like you're saying, you're going a step further and saying, just let's take the whole. And yes, we've had some disclosure, but let's tell us what you've really seen and what you really know.
Right.
And that would
right.
Be,
I mean, there are ways for the military to say that, well, we're disclosing everything we know without disclosing everything that they know. I mean, they're famous to putting these things into compartments where it allows the people above them to have plausible deniability, as they say. I'll give you a perfect example. I have an older brother who was 25 years in the Air Force. When he had been in about 2 years. He was a jet engine mechanic. He was assigned to a stationed at an air base down in Charleston, South Carolina. They were fixing a jet in the middle of the night. It was about 1 a.m. Because it gets so hot down there in the summer that it's best to work at night. And a UFO came right down and hovered over this airplane they were fixing. He said it came to the point where they all just dove and hid underneath the airplane. Now, if you knew my brother is someone who is straight as an arrow, doesn't have, isn't someone who has a wild imagination or anything of that nature. He is just straight as an arrow military guy. And so they saw this thing. It hovered over the airplane for about 5 minutes, and then it took off at high speed. And he said to me the worst mistake he made was telling higher authority about this, because they took him and the three guys who were with him, and they put them in separate rooms. This is military and civilian types, came to the base, put them in separate rooms, kept them there for 3 or 4 days. I mean, they didn't interrogate them. It wasn't a torture beating or anything. They just kept them isolated and kept asking them the same questions over and over until they get just so sick of it that they all signed a affidavit saying that what they saw was a reentry vehicle from some launch in Cape Canaveral. This is how they do. And then, of course, we're told, don't tell anybody about this again. And he just happened to tell me years after it happened. So you have thousands of instances like this, exact like that, where people have been told by higher authority, don't ever talk about this again. And the way that the American soldier is, for the most part, people are going to stick to that. They'll go to their graves with that. Well, free these people. Let them tell their story. Let's hear what they have to say. There's a precedent for this, and what it is it's from really left field. But the don't ask, don't tell people. The reason that they got that repealed is that they embarrassed the military on a regular basis for years until the military just said, okay, let's just do this. And now, there is no more don't ask, don't tell, because it was a media campaign to get rid of that. We could do the same thing if enough people got behind it.
We very well might. And maybe the climate is such that we might do that at this point. It's kind of funny. We have another similarity in our situations there, because my brother, I've mentioned on another show, my brother was a sonar man in the Navy, and he regularly saw what were unidentified submersed objects. Like they could see how fast a whale would be, 30 mile an hour and that. And the Russian sub at the time in the 70s would go 60. But this would go Mach well over 150 miles an hour under the water, and nothing, and completely silent as a ghost. And they had no notion of what it was. None.
Right. One thing I found research in the book was I was astonished at how many reports of USOs there are. I know that I had heard of a few, but in some cases, I think pound for pound, people see USOs as much as they see UFOs. There's really a lot of evidence that UFOs come from the ocean, or at least some of them do.
I've heard that. And my brother was straight as, similar to your brother. He was he was a very smart guy. I mean, he used to be like a chess master, and, I got an MBA from University of California with a 4.0 average. I'm a pretty smart guy. And, but also just not one prone to, imagination or pulling your leg or anything. I mean, he wasn't making any money telling his, preteen brother about this. And,
right. Well, the interesting thing about my brother was that this happened to him, I think, when he was in the Air Force for 2 years, and he went on to stay in the Air Force for 25 years, included stints in Thailand and Vietnam and so on. And at the end of his career, he was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base, which, of course, is right down the road from Area 51. And he'd been to Area 51 on 2 occasions, he told me about. And what he was doing up there was, at the time, what they had up there where they had confiscated Russian MiGs, and they used to fly them against our fighters as a training exercise. And
sure.
Of course, they didn't want the Russians to really know that. But he would go up if one of our fighters broke down and had to land at Area 51. He and his crew would go up to Area 51, fix the plane so they could get it out of there. And he told me that the 2 unusual things about that place was, when you get off the plane, there are signs that say, remember, you were not here, which is interesting. And the other odd thing about it was, he said that in front of a lot of the buildings up there, there were grass lawns. There were lawns that he said he saw people watering them and mowing them. And, of course, it's out in the middle of the desert, and he thought that was very odd, and I do too, that you would have lawns around buildings that are, in one of the worst deserts, hottest deserts, most arid places in the world.
Places you want to be. Well, I wonder what that would signify, though, Mac. I mean, what would it?
I have no idea. Maybe just to keep the people busy or to give them something else to do. But he says it looked very strange. You hardly see a lawn in Las Vegas, but they had lawns at Area 51, or at least they did.
Well, yeah, you might see them in front of a casino, maybe, but that's just a little speck of a lawn anyway. That is bizarre, but everything's bizarre about it. Everything's bizarre. Now, I don't know, of course, there was the Bob Lazar testimony, which was a big question mark on from years ago, but there's been so much alluded to about Area 51. But the whole thing, like I say, back to the Marian apparition facet, and I guess what it really is, to an extent with the general public, is they don't really, like you were saying earlier, they don't want to believe it because it would scare them. It would upset their...
It upsets the apple cart of your daily life, for sure. I mean, certainly with UFOs. There's a story that Winston Churchill was shown a picture of a UFO. In World War II, they called them Foo Fighters. Right. And a British reconnaissance plane had taken a very, very clear picture of a Foo Fighter that was trailing it. And this photograph was shown to Winston Churchill. This is obviously back in World War II. And he immediately said, we cannot show this picture to anybody for 50 years. It subsequently has been destroyed. But his reasoning was, he said, this will destroy civilization, and especially will destroy religion, because he felt that all religions are based on Earth. They're relative to Earth. And our civilization, for the most part, whether people want to believe it or not, the religion is kind of like the glue that keeps civilization together, for good or bad.
Well, yeah.
And if he realized, and if people saw that there were beings other than people from, Earth, on Earth, that it would destroy our civilization. And I think that in a maybe a smaller way or a more individual way, maybe people where they have interests in things like Marian apparitions, UFOs, ghosts, things along those lines, they really don't want them to be true, because if they were true, that upsets what we consider the foundations of our civilization.
And yet, the Vatican is pretty well on board with the fact that they believe, in essence, by de facto statements they've made, that said that there are UFOs and there are aliens. Period. I mean, of course, I've only been a Catholic for about 6 years since I converted, but I have learned, and I know you're a cradle Catholic, but what I'm saying is I have dealt with them enough to know that nobody says anything out of school for the most part. I mean, when there used to be a Monsignor Corrado Balducci that used to be the Vatican's point man, basically, to these UFO conferences in the U.S., and he'd pal around with Paula Harris a lot. And what it amounts to is he lived at the Vatican, Mac. I mean, this guy was Mr. Vatican. I mean, she used to, meet him right down the road from it. And what I'm saying, though, is he didn't operate, even though he's a semi-retired Monsignor, he didn't operate in a void. He was told, basically allowed to say such and such. And that was, and then, of course, there have been other statements from the Vatican, the director of the Vatican Observatory and all this. In essence, the Vatican has laid the groundwork for, yes, we know there's UFOs, and that's just part of God's situation.
Yeah, I think they made a statement a few years ago saying that, if there were other life forms out in space, that they would be, God's children too, and so on. So they're certainly getting ahead of the story as they getting out in front of the story, as they say in the journalism biz. But it's interesting that they would take so much interest in it. Okay, well, I can talk about our big show coming up on Wednesday, the 25th, on InceptionRadio.com. We're going to have a special with Chase and Richard Dolan and myself talking about greatest UFO stories of the 1950s. I hope a lot of people join us. 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, this Wednesday, the 25th, on InceptionRadioNetwork.com.
Well, that's good. They lost me for a minute, Mac. There's some kind of weird deal that happens on the show that doesn't happen on the political shows, because I have politically oriented shows, and I just get lost off the air for no apparent reason. And
that's happened to me several times since I've been promoting this book. Then all of a sudden I'm off the air, and people say, that doesn't happen when we're not talking about UFOs.
It really is bizarre. And, Joe, the producer, and I have talked about it, and for the most part, it especially happens on my show, because he produces other shows. It's just, I don't know, whatever reason. But like I say, the political shows, if I have the FLCIO on or something like that, it just goes right down the line. So I don't know, but it is bizarre. And I've heard other paranormal show people talk about that, too. Jerry Pippin has had that experience of know from some people that have worked and connected with his show. But, I don't know. But I know that it's people's insights are such they don't want their boat to be rocked. But I think the preponderance of evidence has finally made them grudgingly accept this as real. But one thing I was going to say that Colonel Alexander had in his lecture up there in Eureka Springs is they did a poll of about 1,000 clergymen from Protestant, Catholic, Jewish formats, and this general consensus was they didn't see where the acknowledgement of extraterrestrial races existing made any difference at all.
Interesting. Wow.
I mean, that was pretty. It's a really a good demo or a good show he did up there. And but I don't know, Mac. It's hard to say. But see, the thing could be enlarged too beyond this UFO situation and some phenomenology. And that there's so many things that are obvious as the foot on the end of our leg that, like the banking crisis of a few years ago, and all these people committed stock fraud. That if you and I did it, we'd be
in jail,
breaking rocks in upstate New York somewhere.
You bet.
Which may not be that bad. If I had to go to prison, that might be where I'd want to go.
Oh, you don't want to go there, believe me.
Well, I mean, if you had to go to prison, at least I'd be at home. But I looked at this. But at any rate. Be a little nippy up there, but what I'm saying is people that should have done 20, 30 years in prison for derivatives and all that nonsense they were doing, and nobody's ever been prosecuted. I mean,
that's right.
If people think that's an accident, they're just naive as children, really.
Right. I mean, you had the situation that happened, and it's kind of funny because I really don't like politics. I don't like talking about politics, but people seem to confuse the fact they seem to blame that collapse on Obama when it actually happened on George Bush's watch.
I know. Can they be that stupid? I know.
And the reason is, and he's the one who signed the bailout to Wall Street. And the reason is that the top 20 executives, the top 20 people at the Treasury Department were former Goldman Sachs people. And basically, you had Goldman Sachs, the largest bank in the world, running our Treasury Department, and they're the ones that gave the green light to all these derivatives and all these basically underwater mortgages, and they went out and sold them and made a lot of money on them, and almost brought the world economic system into its knees. And then what happens is they basically get bailed out almost $1 trillion by the government. And no one goes to jail except Bernie Madoff, frankly.
Well, yeah, he's the only one that did. But I mean, I know. Well, I mean, what they recently did was somewhere in a somewhat pseudo-related way, the president of Iceland was indicted for some kind of fraudulent deal. But I mean, Iceland, yeah.
That will solve the problem.
Well, I mean, the whole thing, I know, but the whole thing is so bizarre. But I guess as part and parcel with the public's view, they just don't want to believe that they cannot grasp that their leaders would be that crooked or things are really that shady, but they really are.
Oh, but they really, they are. I mean, the modern day politician. Well, look at the state we're in. I mean, and I think you and I talked about this off the air too. Is that there used to be, and it used to be true, that every generation of Americans could say that my children will live better than I did, and that's what kept us going. And that has come to an end. That has come to an end, and it's in this